What is up, you spooky bitches? We are back with another episode of the Hello Sidney podcast here, a podcast for horror lovers where we discuss any and all things horror. And it's me, your girl, Sidney. Happy October. Happy first Friday of October. And it's October 3rd, so I have a very special birthday shout out. Happy birthday, Luke of Luke and Indy. I hope you have the best day ever. I hope I get to meet up with you guys in Salem at the end of the year. I hope you just have the best day. Love you guys. I should have known you were an October baby. Like, that makes so much sense. I feel like I should be as well. I am living the dream right now, though, because last night it was like 60 degrees. I had my windows open. I had a fall candle lit. I watched Halloween. Like, this is just my time to shine, guys. I love this month, but don't worry, in typical New England fashion, it's about to be 80 degrees again, like tomorrow. So that's unfortunate, but I enjoyed it for a couple days. Now, today we're talking about a movie that I love to watch every Halloween season. And this one is incredibly nostalgic for me because I was a fan of these books growing up. And we're talking about Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, which the film came out in 2019. And it's based on a bunch of the scary stories from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Yes, if you're watching the video episode, I'm holding them up. I do have them. I used to have them. I still have my originals somewhere, but when this movie came out, I rebought them because I felt like I needed to have them. I also purposely picked today's episode to be a video episode because the creature design in this movie I love so much. A lot of them are pulled right from the book, so I want to show you that. So if you guys aren't watching the video episode and you want to, it's on YouTube or Spotify. But yeah, so Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. This is a PG-13 movie, so I do say if you have kids and you're trying to get them into horror, I think this is a great movie to show them this season because, yeah, some of the creature designs can be a little creepy. So, obviously watch it first, and depending on your kid's age, you be the judge of that. But I do think this is a great movie to really get your kids involved. And if you read Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark as a kid, I don't think that's any different than your kids watching the movie personally, but I don't have kids, so what the fuck do I know? But I love the way that this movie pays homage to the stories because it creates one big story by putting all of the little stories together. Because in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, they don't all go together. They're all separate little short stories, but this movie makes them all come together. And honestly, I love the way it does it. I think this is a super fun movie. I watch it every season. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, again, came out in 2019. It's about an hour and 48 minutes. It has a 6.2 on IMDb and a 78% on Rotten Tomatoes. So honestly, pretty damn good for a horror movie, especially a PG-13 horror movie. And the movie opens and we hear this creepy music box music playing. And that's going to come into play later as well. And we then get a voiceover, and this is going to be our main character, Stella. And Stella is saying, "Stories heal, stories hurt. If we repeat them often enough, they become real and they make us who we are. They have this power. This I learned from the very last autumn of our childhood." And we cut to 1968 and we get this shot of this old town. And like I said last episode in Dark Harvest, I love movies that are set in the 60s, especially Halloween movies set in the 60s. There's something about it, this fall Halloween vibe is what I want to achieve, and I feel like I can't because I don't live in that time. So I live vicariously through movies like this. So we get a shot of this old town, and we see all these cars driving through, everything's decorated for Halloween. All the storefronts have all Halloween decorations. It's just super cute. And the song Season of the Witch is playing in the background. And we see a bunch of different groups of people. We see this group of jocks that we're going to meet later, and we see Stella, our main character, riding through town on her bike. And again, it's just the cutest little town. And eventually she gets home. Her dad asks her if she's going out. Her dad is played by the same guy who plays Hank in Breaking Bad, which is all I can see him as, but he's in this movie as well. But she says no, she's not going out. And she seems sad. You can tell their relationship is kind of tense just from this very short exchange. And he's also watching the news about the war because this is at the time of the Vietnam War. So Stella goes to her room and we see that she has these drawings everywhere and these typed out stories. So Stella's a writer, she's creative. And as she's sitting in her room, she gets a walkie-talkie call because, again, it's the 60s. And it's her friends. And she tells them she doesn't want to go trick-or-treating. And it's her two friends, Auggie, which is short for August, and Chuck. And they're like, this might be our last Halloween together. So they end up convincing her to go. So we then cut to this guy, and his name is going to end up being Ramon. We're going to meet him later on, but he is at a gas station and he's filling up his car, and the cop of the town kind of looks at him suspiciously because Ramon is not white, okay? So like it's the 60s, so he's looking at him suspiciously. So we cut to that group of bullies we saw walking through the town earlier, and their like leader is this kid named Tommy, and they're in this cornfield and they are throwing shit at this scarecrow. And the scarecrow is like, his name is Harold, and he is based on the story from the third Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark book, Harold. And I'll show you a picture of him later when we get into his story, but he's creepy as fuck. Like, he looks creepy as fuck, like, to the point where the poster for this movie is Harold, because they knew that was the best thing they had in it. Like, he's the best part. But they're, like, throwing shit at this scarecrow and, like, beating him with a bat. Like, I don't know. So we cut back to Chuck and we see that he's dressing up. It's Halloween night. So he's getting dressed and he's dressed as a spider. And he's like pissed. He's like, I said Spider-Man. Like he's yelling at his mom because she obviously made his costume. But he ends up packing up his stuff and he goes to leave. And as he's leaving, his sister Ruth makes fun of him for still trick-or-treating. And the two of them banter for a minute like siblings do. But eventually he leaves and he meets Auggie outside. And we cut back to Stella and we see that she's getting ready. She's dressing up as a witch. And we cut to that night. It's Halloween night. Kids are trick-or-treating and the three friends are walking down the street and Stella is saying like he's not going to show. And Chuck is adamant. He's like, no, Tommy does this every year. Like this year is his last. He's going to show and we're going to show him pretty much. So Auggie starts to encourage Stella to write for the school paper and she starts to say no. So again, you could tell Stella's just a very shy girl, but she's very creative. So we cut to Tommy and we see that he's in the car, he's driving, his two friends are in the back seat, and Ruth, Chuck's sister, is in the passenger seat, and she's pissed. She's like, I thought we were going to dinner. Like, she obviously doesn't want to be doing this childish shit, but Tommy's dragging her into it. And they drive by the three that are the group that's walking on the street, and as they do, one of the friends leans out the window and steals their candy bag from them. But when they open it, they're like, it's a bunch of fucking old underwear. And they like start gagging. So like, obviously, again, the group planned this. Like they're trying to show Tommy and his group like, fuck you guys. And as the car slows down, they pull out a bunch of eggs and they start egging the car, which obviously pisses Tommy off. So he turns his car around and he starts driving back towards them. And Chuck he like lights this bag on fire and he throws it in the car. It's a flaming bag of shit. He throws it onto Tommy, who starts to put it out with his hand. So he's got shit all over him now. It's fucking chaos to the point where Tommy then crashes his car through a fence. So the three are laughing. They think this is hilarious. And Ruth gets out of the car and she sees that her brother is responsible for it. So she starts yelling at him. And then Tommy and the two other boys get out and they start chasing the group of three and they all start running. And eventually they chase them into this drive-in movie theater that is currently playing Night of the Living Dead, because that would have came out in 1968, which is the year that this movie takes place. And they're like hiding in between the cars, trying to escape the jocks. And Stella suddenly gets in this car. And when she gets in the car, there's a boy sitting there, and it's Ramon, who's the kid that we had seen earlier who was being judged by the cop at the gas station. So Auggie and Chuck follow and get in the back seat, and Ramon's all confused. He's like, who the fuck are you people? And the bullies walk by and the three of them kind of like crouch down. So they walk by without seeing them. And they like take a breath of relief and they thank Ramon. And Chuck takes it upon himself to be like, why are you here alone? And where are you from? Like, he starts asking all these questions and Ramon just doesn't answer. And Stella is the only one that gets his attention because she points out the movie that's playing. She's like, oh, Night of the Living Dead. Like, this is the best flick all year. And she and Ramon like talk about it for a second. He introduces himself. She introduces herself. And then the two idiots in the back are like, yeah, I'm Auggie. I'm Chuck. Like, even though Ramon clearly doesn't give a fuck. And they're very awkwardly introducing themselves from the back. And suddenly Tommy and crew show up. So they have found them and they start trying to open the car door and it won't open. And Tommy says to Ramon, like, everybody needs to get out of the car. You too, wetback. So this is obviously a derogatory term for Mexican people who are living in the United States. So poor Ramon is just out here trying to mind his own fucking business. The cops judging him. He's getting fucking slurs thrown at him. And then Tommy looks at Stella and is like, are you going to try and run away like mommy? Like, so we know something happened with Stella's mom at this point, and this very much upsets her. And Ramon just looks at him and is like, you smell like shit. Get off my car. Like, he is not messing around with these fucking idiots. And in addition to that, people start beeping because they're standing up, they're blocking the view. So they start beeping, and some guy who I'm guessing is an employee at this place comes out with the bat and is like, you guys need to get out. So Tommy and crew at this point have no other option. So they end up leaving. And as they're leaving, Tommy is like, this ain't over. So they end up leaving, and Stella is very upset by this comment that Tommy made. So she gets out of the car and she goes to the bathroom, and Ramon looks concerned, and Chuck and Auggie explain to him that Stella's mom left when she was a kid, and because it's a small town, the gossip got really, really mean, and it still bothers her to this day, and we're her only friends. So we're the only people that even talk to her anymore because everybody's just fucking judging her for God knows what. So Stella eventually gets herself together. She comes back to the car and she looks at Ramon and she's like, do you want to see a haunted house? Which this famous fucking last words in a horror movie, right? So sure enough, they go to this haunted house. They all pull up to this old abandoned house and they explain to Ramon the significance behind it. They're explaining how some kid went missing a few years ago, so they ended up boarding it up, and they break through the fence and they go up to the house, and they continue to explain how a child murderer used to live here. Auggie is like, Augie's the one that's scared. He's like, I don't want to go in somewhere where a child murderer used to live. And Stella starts to explain the story about how the Bellows used to live here, and they were one of the first families to settle here in the 19th century, and they built a paper mill that pretty much put this town on the map. So they were a super rich family. They lived in this big, beautiful mansion, and they get to the door, and they see that there's a padlock on it. And Chuck pulls out a pen and gives it to Ramon, who uses it to pick the lock. So they open the door, they get the padlock off, and they open the door, and Stella continues to explain how the Bellows had a daughter and they didn't allow her to leave the house. And the myth is something was off about her. They were embarrassed by her. That's why they wouldn't let her leave. And Chuck continues explaining her family even erased her from every portrait. So nobody's even ever seen a picture of her. We don't know what Sarah Bellows looked like. That was her name. And Stella brings up how they disowned her. So Auggie and Chuck at this point go upstairs, and Stella and Ramon stay on the main floor. And Stella explains how kids would come from all over trying to get a peek at Sarah, when she was still alive, and they could hear her through the wall, and she would tell them scary stories. And some kids never returned home, and kids around town died, and everybody knew that it was Sarah, but before the mob could get her, she ended up hanging herself with her own hair. You gotta have some strong ass fucking hair to do that. This Rapunzel ass bitch. What the hell? So she goes on to explain how if you come to the Bellows house at dark and ask Sarah to tell you a story, it'll be the last story you ever hear. But Stella's kind of laughing while she says this. She obviously doesn't believe it. And Ramon doesn't either. He laughs with her. However, Ramon then notices something in the wall, and he moves this cupboard. And sure enough, when he moves this cupboard, it reveals a hidden door. And he and Stella open this door and they go down the stairs, and they find another room with another lock. So Ramon once again pulls out a knife and he picks this lock. And when they go in, they find that it was Sarah's room. So this is where they used to hide their daughter, down in this hidden, concealed basement. So we cut to upstairs, and Auggie and Chuck are still running around doing whatever. And Auggie is calling out to Chuck, you're not going to scare me, because he thinks he's going to jump out and scare him, which it seems like Chuck is preparing to do, because Chuck hides in a closet so that he can jump out and scare Auggie. However, when he goes to open the closet, suddenly, because this is an abandoned, dilapidated, dark, dank house, but suddenly when he opens the door, the room is completely brand new, and it's beautiful, and it's lit, and there's furniture like this beautiful couch I'm sitting on in there. What's also in there is an old woman sitting on the bed with a veil over her face, and there is this giant dog sitting in front of her, just staring directly at Chuck as he's looking at all of this just in disbelief. And he ends up closing the door, and he's panicking because he's like, what the fuck? And he hears footsteps approaching, and he's freaking out, and they get closer, and suddenly the door opens, and it's just Auggie, and the room is all old and dilapidated again, and Chuck is confused as fuck. So Chuck says to Auggie, he's like, we got to get out of here. So he grabs him and they run downstairs and they call out for Stella, and they hear her calling for them down in the hidden room. So they end up going down there, and Stella is like, this is where her family locked her away. And she told her stories through this wall. So there's a chair where Sarah used to sit, and this is the wall where the kids could hear her through, where she would tell them the scary stories. So Stella then is looking around and she finds this creepy ass music box. And when she opens it, it plays that tune from the beginning, and the initials SB are carved into it. So of course this was Sarah's. And then she continues to look around more, and she finds this old heavy book on a shelf, and she pulls it out. And when she opens it, it says, "This book belongs to Sarah Bellows." And at this point, Stella realizes it's her book of scary stories. So of course, scary stories to tell in the dark, like this is the whole thing. So Auggie brings up, he's like, the myth is that the words in that book are written in children's blood. And Chuck is like, kids die in the myths, put it back. Like he's the one now that's like, nope, we got to get out of here, like put it back, this is a terrible idea, which we should have listened to Chuck. But suddenly they're all distracted because they get startled by the door slamming. And sure enough, we cut to upstairs and we see that Tommy and his friends have found them. They've followed them here, and they are now locking them into the basement. And Ruth is pissed about this because she's like, come on, like enough, like let him out. And she kind of threatens him. And Tommy approaches her threateningly as well, which makes her kind of step aside. But then she's like, fuck you. She walks by him and she opens the door and she's like, all right, come on. But before they can even make it up, Tommy pushes Ruth down the stairs into the basement and locks her in as well. They shut and they lock the door, and Tommy and his fucking ragtag group of fucking loser ass bullies leave. And as he pushes Ruth down the stairs, he's like, you're trash anyway. Like, bitch, look at yourself, you fucking worm boy. But she falls down the stairs, and like Chuck apologizes and like tries to tell Tommy, like, please let us out, please let us out. But Tommy and the group leave. So Ruth gets caught up in a spider web, and she's panicking. Auggie like cleans the spider web off of her, and they all start trying the door. However, Stella is still in the basement, and she's still looking at this book. And she says out loud, Sarah Bellows, tell me a story. And she looks at Sarah's empty chair, and she ends up taking the book. And the others are continuing to bang on the door. And outside the door, we see this shadow move across the wall, and it's of a hand like this. It's very like Nosferatu, like original Nosferatu. And as this hand gets to the door, suddenly the door is unlocked, and they all start struggling, and the door opens, and they're all very confused. They're like, who the fuck just let us out of here? But they don't even care. They run out. They're like, yeah, fuck this place. So they run out, and they're wondering who unlocked the door as they're leaving. But eventually they get to Ramon's car, and they see that it's been vandalized and wetback has been spray painted on it. These fucking assholes. Like the windshield's broken, like it's destroyed. So he's devastated by this because he sleeps in his car, which they had seen earlier when they were in the back seat, Chuck and Auggie at the drive-in. Like they saw a bunch of clothes, and Chuck was like, dude, do you sleep in your car? And Ramon kind of got embarrassed. So they know that he sleeps in his car, and Stella offers him, she's like, we have a couch in our basement, like you can come and stay there. We just have to not wake up my dad. So they end up getting to Stella's house. Stella sees her dad asleep on the couch. She goes and she covers him, and Ramon ends up going into Stella's room with her, and she's looking at Stella's stories. He's looking at Stella's stories that she has all over her room, and sees like her comic books that she has, and he tells her that if she's serious about being a writer, she has to move to the city. Like you could never make it in a small town like this. And Stella is like, I couldn't leave my dad. Like I could never do that. And Ramon ends up going to the basement eventually, and as he leaves, Stella looks at the book, and it's Sarah Bellows' book that she ended up taking from the house. And she's flipping through the pages, and there is these handwritten stories, and they're all handwritten in red ink. And we're seeing the names of these stories. So it's like the attic, the cat's paw, the Wendigo, and these are all stories that are in the 3 scary stories to tell in the dark books. So she flips through a little bit, and then suddenly it's just blank. Like the rest of the pages are all blank for like more than half the book. So she's like, okay, that's weird. But then she flips back, and there's a story that wasn't there, and suddenly it is there. And this story is called Harold. This is the first one we're going to get. And sure enough, she like moves her finger over the title, and it smudges. So like it's fresh. Like this was just written somehow. So we now cut to Tommy, this fucking worm boy bully, and he's getting home. It's dark out, and it turns out he lives right where that cornfield is. And he gets out of his car, and his mom's all pissed at him because he's like kind of stumbling, and she's like, are you drunk again? Like you were supposed to go deliver eggs. Like I don't care how late it is. Go do it now. So we cut to this cornfield, and we see Harold strung up, the scarecrow. He's strung up, and the wind blows. And we cut back to Stella, and she starts reading this story. And the story starts to say how Tommy hated that scarecrow all his life. And he took his eggs, and he left for the last time. And she questions it. She's like, Tommy? Because obviously she knows a Tommy. So we cut back to the cornfield and the wind blows through and Tommy walks through with this basket of eggs that he has to go deliver. And he passes Harold and he says to him, "Eat shit, Harold," and he kicks him and he continues walking. But he continues on and then suddenly he comes across the scarecrow again. And you can tell that Tommy's like kind of confused by this because he's like, I just walked by this fucking thing. Like, how am I here again? So he looks around, but he just keeps walking and the camera zooms in on Harold's face and he's got like bugs crawling all over him and shit. And I'll put up a picture of what Harold looks like. And this is also what Harold looks like in the book. So this is what they modeled the movie poster after. It's literally exactly this. And this is what they modeled the look of Harold after. So the creatures that you see in this movie aren't really made up. Like, they're pretty fucking spot on. And like, this is a children's book, bitch. Like, what do you mean? And this is why we're all fucked up, because this is the shit that we were reading as kids. So Tommy continues on, and he this time passes the pole where Harold is supposed to be again. However, this time Harold is gone, and the wind starts blowing, and the corn is rustling, and it's all quiet, and Tommy looks around, and he tries to move on. You can tell he's obviously freaking out at this point, and he looks back to see a figure move into the corn. This is very Signs. Like, if you guys remember my Signs episode, or if you've seen Signs and you remember this scene where he's in the cornfield, and it's ever so subtle where he turns and sees the alien's leg like moving into the corn. That's kind of exactly what you see here. Like, you can see that something moved into the corn. You can't exactly see what it is. But of course, we know that it's Harold. So he turns and sees this, and when he goes to turn back to walk away, Harold is directly in his face. And this frightens Tommy, obviously, and he falls to the ground. And Harold's limbs start to like creak and break and crack, and he starts slowly walking towards Tommy, who panics, and he gets up and he runs, and eventually he falls over something, but it turns out it's a pitchfork. So he picks this up, and Harold continues towards him, and he stabs Harold through the stomach with this pitchfork, but nothing fucking happens because he's a scarecrow. So like, what is that gonna do? So it doesn't stop Harold, and in fact, he pulls this pitchfork out of his stomach, and Tommy goes to run, and he just stabs him through the back with it. And he keeps trying to run even though he's been stabbed through the fucking back with a pitchfork, and he's calling out for his mom, which, like, even though he's an asshole, it always makes me fucking sad when people call out for their mom. So like, he's running out of the corn and he's trying to scream like, "Mom, help." And then suddenly he starts choking, and we see that there is like hay and shit that would be in a scarecrow like coming up through his mouth. And then suddenly this hay starts coming from everywhere. Like, it's coming out of his ears, it's coming out of his sleeves, it's coming out of the holes in his chest where he was stabbed. And eventually he's like retching and he's choking, and he turns into a scarecrow. Like, he is now Harold, and we cut. So the next day we cut to Ramon, and he's brought his car into the shop, obviously because it's been fucking vandalized, and that same cop is there again, and he's still judging Ramon. He's like, "I thought you were going to be on your way out of town, pretty much, like, what the fuck?" And then he starts questioning him about Tommy, because he's like, "Hey, so this kid Tommy hasn't been seen, and I heard that he got in a fight at the drive-in. Like, do you have anything to do with that?" And Ramon doesn't answer, and the cop tells him, like, "You know what, you should actually stick around here for a few days." So obviously he's suspicious of him. And again, that has nothing to do with anything other than the fact that this guy is just a fucking racist, as are most people in this town, apparently, because it's the 60s. So Stella at this point is kind of freaking out, and she ends up telling Auggie and Chuck at school about the stories, and she shows them the Harold story and about how Tommy turns into a scarecrow, which that doesn't happen in the original story. So like, they use the story. That's what I like about this too, because again, I hate when things adapt from things and just copy them completely. Like, I love how they make it their own. So they use Harold and like the basis of the story, but they made it their own as well. So she goes on to explain how the story is about this kid Tommy being turned into a scarecrow, and the story just appeared, like it wasn't there, and now Tommy's disappeared. So she's freaking out, and Auggie doesn't believe it. And Chuck tells them about how he saw that room in the house. He's like, "No, like, I do think that something's wrong. Like, I saw this room with an old woman and a dog." And Auggie thinks they're both crazy. Like, he's obviously the logical one. But we cut to Stella, and she's now with Ramon. It's after school, and they're going to the cornfield because Stella wants to see the scarecrow. And they get to it, and it now has Tommy's Letterman jacket on it. So again, like, we know that this is Tommy now. And Stella is pretty adamant. She's like, Tommy was wearing this last night. Like, what happened in the book happened for real. And Ramon insists, like, no, it's just a scarecrow. Like, come on. So Stella ends up going back to the Bellows house by herself. And she brings the book down back into the basement, which was Sarah's living quarters. And she puts it back and she leaves, which you think, like, oh, okay, like, that's the end of it, right? Of course, fucking not. So Stella ends up going home. She sees her dad and they talk about how much he's been working. Like, you can tell they've always they're kind of struggling, and she's like, did you always work this much? And he kind of ignores it, and he brings up Tommy not coming home and asks her to come straight home for the next few days because he's a little panicked by that. He doesn't want anything to happen to her. We cut back to Chuck's house, and we see his sister Ruth in the bathroom, and she's looking at this red spot that she has on her face. And Chuck, like being the typical brother, like makes fun of her for having a pimple, and she yells at him that it's a spider bite, and she closes the door. So Ramon ends up going over to Stella's house, and they're in her room, and they're talking about Tommy, and then suddenly mid-sentence, Stella turns around to see Ramon holding that book, and she freaks out. She's like, where did you get that? And he's like, it was right here. Like, it was on your bookshelf. And she's like, no, I brought it back to the house. So of course, like, this shit isn't over that easily. So they end up opening the book and they see a story being written in real time now. Like, the Harold one just appeared. This one is being written in real time. And this one is called The Big Toe, which is another story from the books. And she starts panicking. And as it's being written, she's ripping the pages out, but it just continues being written on the next page. Like, nothing can stop this from being written. And she starts reading the story, and she sees that the name in this story is August, which of course is Auggie. So she panics and she picks up her walkie-talkie and she radios to Auggie, and he's at home by himself and he's on the phone with his mom. And it turns out that she left for the weekend, so he's talking about, like, you didn't leave me anything here to eat. But then he opens the fridge and he sees this pot and he's like, oh, I'll just eat the stew. And we can't hear what she's saying, but we can tell that she's confused because he's like, no, like, somebody made it, it's in here. So, like, nobody knows where this fucking stew came from, but he decides to eat it anyway. So he pulls it out of the fridge and he hangs up the phone with his mom, and Stella starts to walkie-talkie him, and she's like, do not eat anything, you're in the next story. And he thinks it's a fucking joke. Like, he is not listening to her. And Ramon gets on and he's like, no, dude, like, I'm looking at this, the story is writing itself. And they start to read what it's writing. A voice called out, who took my toe? It's a corpse looking for her missing toe. And Auggie is like, wait a second, I know that story. Like, that used to scare the hell out of me when I was a kid. But there's no voice here. Like, I don't hear any voice calling to me. And we cut to the stew because as he's saying this, like, he's opening the stew, he's like starting to like take a spoon and fucking spin it around. And we see something questionable floating in it, but he doesn't see it yet. But Auggie starts to eat the stew, and suddenly he looks like there's something in his mouth that he doesn't like, and he like makes a face and he goes to pull something out of his mouth, and sure enough, it's a big toe. So he panics and he knocks the stew over by accident, and it falls on the ground, and we see like an eyeball in it as well, which foul, absolutely fucking disgusting. So he like gags, and then suddenly he starts to hear footsteps, and he tells Stella there was a toe in the stew, and he asks her what the book says, because at this point he's like, okay, obviously this is real. So she starts reading what's going to happen, and she's saying like, he's scared, he doesn't know where to hide, and Auggie is like, how does the book know that? Because that's exactly how he feels. And Stella goes on to say the story is saying Auggie hears the voice, who took my, and then he starts to hear the voice as well. So he's hearing it as Stella is saying it. So at this point, he runs into his bedroom, and Stella and Ramon decide that they need to go fucking do something. So they run out of Stella's house because Auggie lives just a couple blocks away. So they're going to run to his house. And we cut back to Augie's house, and we see this like corpse-like looking creature walking down the hall. And we cut to their feet, and they're missing a big toe. And Auggie hears this thing saying again, who took my toe? And he locks himself in his room, where he closes his bedroom door, and he can't get the window open, so instead he hides under his bed, and he patiently waits because he can't fucking do anything else. And he hears the doorknob rattling, and suddenly the doorknob turns and it slowly starts to open, and Auggie looks around, and we're getting like his POV from underneath his bed. And eventually he's just watching, and he doesn't see anything, and he doesn't hear anything anymore either. So he slowly comes out from under his bed, and he looks around, and he's like on his back as he's doing this, and he goes to sit up and look on his bed, and there's nothing there. So he like relaxes for a second, but then suddenly he is dragged violently back underneath the bed. And there is this like creature above him that just screeches in his face and drags him away into the darkness, and he's just gone. That's it. That's it for Auggie, R.I.P. So eventually Stella and Ramon get there, and Auggie is nowhere to be found. And they like look all around his room, and they pull his bed away, and they see fingernail marks on the floor because he tried to grab the floor when he was being dragged away, and they just like go into the wall. Like he was literally just dragged away into nothingness, and he's gone. So we cut to probably the next day, and we hear the radio. There's a radio announcement about Tommy's disappearance and how there's like dogs out looking for him. We see dogs and a bunch of people searching, and we cut to Stella, and she's crying, and she's blaming herself for what happened because she took the book. And Ramon is trying to tell her and like comfort her, like it's not your fault. And Stella goes on, she's like, I caused everything bad in my life, like first my mom leaving, now Auggie. So obviously like Stella's got some trauma going on here. And Ramon again tries to comfort her. And then we see Chuck and Ruth pull up, and they get out of the car, and Stella tells them that Auggie is gone. And Chuck is like, what do you mean gone? And she's like, there was another story written, and she shows it to them. And Stella is like, I don't think he's coming back. And Tommy and Auggie had their stories in the book, and it's happening every night because you don't read the book reads you. And I'm afraid we woke something up in that house, and the same thing is going to happen to all of us because we were all there. Like we were all in that basement when we woke this up and when this happened. And now it's Ruth's turn to be the logical one and not believe anybody because she's like, stories can't hurt you. Sarah Bellows is a myth and she's dead. And Chuck suggests that they go to the police, and Stella's like, we can't do that because they know about Ramon's car and they'll blame him and they'll never believe us. And Chuck is like, so we just sit and wait for our stories to be written? Like there's got to be some way to stop the witch. And Ruth is like, listen, I don't know what the fuck you guys are talking about, but my musical is tonight and I'm not falling for a dumb prank. So she ends up leaving, and the three of them are left there, and Stella takes the book and they throw it into a barrel and they light this fucking thing on fire. And the three of them kind of watch as it burns, or they think that it burns. And as the fire goes out, they knock the barrel over and a bunch of ash comes out, but the book comes out still fully intact. So there's no destroying this thing. And Stella's like, listen, maybe our next step is to find out more information. Like, what do we actually know about Sarah Bellows? So the three of them go to the local library and they start looking up articles, and they find a couple of records and different articles, and they're seeing some of the names in these articles, and they start comparing it to the stories, and they're seeing that the names in the stories are the names of missing people. And they find one article about how after Sarah hung herself, her family fired Sylvie Baptiste, who was like their maid, and she had a daughter named Lulu because the two of them were thought to be responsible for teaching Sarah black magic. And Ramon finds another article about how the last Bellows leaves. So basically Sarah hung herself in 1898, and within 1 year all the family members left, but not just left, like they just seemingly fell off the face of the earth. Like they just disappeared. And they see that Sarah's father's name was Deodat. And Stella's like, wait, I've seen that name. And she starts flipping through the book and she finds a story with the name Deodat. And it's the story The Wendigo. And Ramon is like, okay, well, here's another name, and gives Stella the name Ephraim, which was the brother of Sarah. And sure enough, his name is in his story too. So Stella starts flipping through and she starts to see another story being written. And this one is called The Red Spot, which is another story in the third book. And she looks at Chuck, and it turns out he has a red spot on his white shirt. So they all think it's about him. But then Stella starts to read the story, and it's about a spider and a young girl named Ruth. So they're like, oh, fuck. So we cut to Ruth, and she's at school, and we see she's getting ready for this musical, but that red spot that was on her face earlier is still there. However, it's now massive, and it's like all red and irritated. It looks like a giant cyst on her cheek. And one of the other girls looks at her and is like, you need to do something about that. So Ruth runs away, and she goes into the bathroom, and she's like in the mirror. She's all panicked about this, and she's like crying, and she starts to try and squeeze it. And now we see this shadow move along the wall towards her. So of course we understand, like, this is Sarah Bellows who is orchestrating this whole thing. And the other three run into the school, and they're looking for Ruth. They're going into all the bathrooms, and in the bathroom that she's in, Ruth starts to hear her name being whispered. whispered, and she keeps touching her face, and like she's obviously in pain, and she sees something moving underneath her skin, like as she's trying to pop this thing. And eventually this little leg pops out of it. Like it's a little spider leg. It just pops out. So she goes to touch it and like it's not moving. And then she goes to like try and kind of pull it. And suddenly the leg moves. So she obviously freaks out. Like she knows this is a fucking spider in her face. And sure enough, one spider bursts through, and then just a fucking bunch of spiders start bursting through and crawling all over her face and all over her. And she's screaming, and the three eventually hear the screams, and they get to the bathroom where she is, and they find her on the floor with these spiders everywhere. And they're running up to her and like trying to get them off of her. And Chuck ends up running out into the hallway, and he grabs a bucket of water, and he comes back and he just douses Ruth in this bucket of water, which actually works. Like all the spiders like fall off of her because of this, and the spiders are all gone, and she's still screaming like and she is inconsolable. And Chuck goes up to her and he hugs her and he's trying to calm her down, and she's still screaming like get them off, like she's obviously like fucking insane, like she's not well. And as this is happening, Stella sees this shadow on the wall kind of like disappear. So Stella again knows like this is Sarah Bellows. She's doing this whole thing. And eventually we cut to outside, and like the cops are at the school because they came to answer to this whole thing. And Stella tells Ramon and Chuck, I saw her, talking about Sarah Bellows, like the shadow. She was there and she was controlling the whole thing. And Chuck at this point is so upset and he's crying and he's like, we're next. Like, what the fuck are we going to do? So the group ends up looking up Louise Baptiste, Lulu Baptiste, that name that they had seen in one of the articles from earlier. And as they're doing this, and as they're on their way to this place, Chuck decides to tell Ramon and Stella about how he had a dream that he was trapped in the Red Room. It's giving Haunting of Hill House. But he was trapped in the Red Room, and this fat, pale lady whispers, this is an evil place, and I'm scared that the witch is going to use it against me. Because at this point, we understand, and they understand, that they use your fears against you. Like Sarah uses your fears against you. So like Tommy had always been kind of scared of this fucking scarecrow, Harold. He never liked him. So that's what was used towards him. Augie said that this big toe story scared him as a kid. So they used that against him. Like Ruth was scared of spiders. So they used that against her. So the group ends up getting to this woman Lulu's house, and they knock on the door, and Lulu is now an old woman because this happened literally in like 1898. So Lulu's daughter lets them in, and they go in. Lulu's sitting there. Again, she's an old woman. She's kind of like just catatonic, like looking off at nothing. Like she's not all there. And Stella sees a music box on the shelf, and she opens it, and it starts playing the same tune from the house. And this is what gets Lulu's attention. Like this snaps her out of it. And she looks at Stella and she says, "You may be next." That's the song. And she starts to sing the lyrics. And basically the lyrics are like, if a hearse goes by, don't laugh, you might be the next to die. And where does that come from? Book 1, the Hearst song. So I love how they tie that in here, and that's exactly where the lyrics come from. Lulu explains how Sarah loved that song, and Stella finally tells her, like, we have her book. And at this point, Lulu's eyes get wide, and she's like, you found her book? Like, give it here. So she gives the book over to Lulu, and she looks at it, and she's like, I gave her this, and I feel so sorry for that girl. Like, I always felt sorry for her, just sitting in the darkness all by herself. And they ask Lulu, like, did your mom teach her anything? And she says, no, there is no magic. There is only rage. Like Sarah feels this rage. And Stella asks, how is she still writing stories? And Lulu says, stories hurt, stories heal. So this is what we heard Stella saying in the beginning. Do you know what you have done? You should not have taken this book. So like, basically you're fucked. And she goes on to say, you made her angry. And she starts singing that song again, the Hearst song. And Lulu's daughter at this point is like, sorry, she gets like this sometimes, like, you guys gotta leave. And they start to ask more questions, and the daughter gets upset, and she's like, no, like, mama told everybody what happened. Like, she told the doctors in the hospital where that girl hanged herself. And Stella and them are confused. They're like, I thought she hanged herself in the house. And the woman is like, no, like, mama was there, you guys weren't. Like, get the fuck out of here, pretty much. So at this point, they realize that they need to go to the hospital to find out what happened and see if they can get any records of Sarah. So the three of them get on a bus and they go to the hospital, and the radio is talking about say no to Vietnam. Like, that's been kind of in the background this whole time. Like, we're seeing like campaign signs because it's the presidential election and things about the Vietnam War. But eventually the three of them get off the bus at the hospital, and they go in and ask for records of a former patient. And they're just like, yeah, we don't give that out. And Stella's like, well, she died like 100 years ago though, so like it's fine. And they ask why they need this, and they make up that they need it for a school project. And the doctor looks at the nurse that's answering their questions and is like, they put the files from the old hospital in the red room. And the second they say red room, Chuck's eyes go wide and he's like, the red room? Because that's what his dream was about, like this red room. So the nurse is like, okay, well, if it's an old file, we can get it for you, but it's 6 weeks processing time. And she hands her like an application or a form to fill out. So they take it, and the nurse turns away, and the door to the back opens when a bunch of doctors come out. And of course, the 3 sneak in. They're like, yeah, we're not fucking waiting 6 weeks. Like, we don't have that time. So they sneak in. So they start looking through the hospital, and poor Chuck is like, guys, I don't want to go to the red room. Like, that's where my dream happens. I can't go there. But they keep moving, and they see a sign for the red room, but it's RED. It's like records and evaluation or some shit. So they're like, don't worry. It's not like an actual color red room. Like, it's just a red room. It's fine. So Chuck is like, I'm still going to stay back. So he stays back while the other 2 go on to go to this room. And Chuck ends up like going to this outside area, and the door behind him closes and it locks him out. So he's like, oh, fuck. But there's this other door across the way, but he has to pass a bunch of orderlies to get there. So he tries to like walk by them unnoticed, but it of course doesn't work because they start asking him like, hey, what are you doing here? So he starts fast walking, and he gets to that other door, and that one opens. So he gets through, but the orderlies start following him. And at this point, Chuck starts running, and now a chase ensues. So we cut back to Ramon and Stella, and they end up getting into the records room, and they find Sarah's file, and they find that she was admitted by her family because she was suffering from achromasia albinism. So she was a fucking albino. So that's apparently why her family wanted to hide her away. Like, okay. And at this point, Stella realizes, and she says it, like they put her in the basement because she was different. And they go on to look at these records. And apparently, according to the records, Sarah's doctor was Ephraim, her own brother. So they're like, what the fuck? So they keep looking through these files, and they discover how they basically tortured Sarah. Like, they forced her to go through electroshock therapy and isolation therapy. And they find this recording, and they're like, we're going to finally be able to hear Sarah's voice. So as this is happening, we see Chuck still running from the orderlies, and one of them screams at somebody to sound the alarm. So like, this is not going well. But the other 2 put this recording in this like fucking phonograph or whatever the fuck it is. I don't know. It's the 60s. But they start listening to this recording, and it's a recording of the doctor, who is Sarah's brother, and Sarah. And Sarah is like, I didn't hurt the children. And the doctor insists that isn't the truth. And Sarah just is adamant. She's like, I didn't do it. And suddenly we hear electricity, like she is being electrocuted, and she's like moaning, and she's like screaming out in pain. And when that stops, she's like, I'm your sister, like your own fucking brother is doing this to you. And the doctor is like, you poisoned them. And she says, no, I tried to save them, but nobody listened. I didn't want them hurt, but you wouldn't let me out. Like, you guys wouldn't let me out of the basement. So they shock her again, and the doctor again is like, tell the truth. And Stella is listening to this horrified, and she's like, she doesn't know what she did. So Sarah then starts going on about how it was the water, and the doctor is like, there's nothing wrong with the water. And Sarah is like, it was the mercury from the mill. You poisoned the water. And before she can even like fully finish that sentence or say anything else, he shocks her again. And at this point, Ramon realizes, he's like, she didn't do it. It was her family. Like, they were the ones that did this shit. So the recording continues, and the doctor is like, are you still here? And Sarah, at this point, she's been tortured, and she's like, I'll tell you what you want to hear. And it goes silent, and they're like waiting for Sarah to say something, and they're listening and they're waiting. And then suddenly Sarah's voice starts to say, Charlie had a dream of a red room. So now we know this is the story. And instead of being written down, it's now being spoken through this thing. And in his dream, a woman with a pale face, black eyes, and long black hair slips silently into his room. So we cut to Chuck, and he's in the hallway, and it's a brightly lit hallway, and he starts to hear this voice too. Like, the voice is like whispering through the halls, and suddenly an alarm starts sounding. And when that happens, the brightly lit hallway turns into a red room, because with the alarm comes this red light. So now the whole thing is illuminated by red light, and Stella and Ramon have ended up running out of the room because Charlie, aka Chuck, like they know that this is about him. So they ran out of the room to go find him. And we see this shadow moving along the ceiling. So of course we know that Sarah is here. And we cut to Chuck and we see him running down the hall. And at the end of the hall, he sees this fat, pale woman standing there. And she starts to slowly walk towards him. And she is like not human looking. I'll show you a picture of her and also what she was based on. So this story is based off the dream, which is in the 3rd book, and this is the drawing. And it's exactly what she looks like. Like they made an exact replica. Same as Harold, this is an exact replica of what the creature looks like. Like I think they did such a good job with this. So Chuck sees her at the end of the hallway and he starts to run the other way. But when he runs the other way, he then sees her down that hallway. So it's kind of like Harold. Like he was fucking everywhere at the same time. This bitch is too. So then he runs another way, but then he sees her down that hallway and he runs another way. And this kind of keeps happening. And at one point he gets cornered because he sees her coming from 2 directions, but there's 2 other directions. So he goes one way and he's cornered there. And then the other way, and now he's cornered in 4 directions, basically. Like this goes back and forth for a minute, but he's now cornered in 4 directions. And he's like trying to open these doors. They're all locked. It's not working. So he literally has nowhere to go. And all 4 of these fat, pale ladies start just like approaching him slowly. And eventually they all close in on him until he's quite literally boxed in. And then they close in on him and one of them hugs him and just like literally absorbs him. Like he just becomes a part of this woman and they all absorb and become one. Like it's just the one fat lady standing there and he's gone. Chuck is gone. And Stella and Ramon eventually show up and they find that he's gone. He's nowhere to be found. And Stella finds his pen on the ground, which is how she knows that he was here and now he's not. And now at this point, the orderlies finally show up and obviously it's too fucking late for that. So we cut to Stella and she calls her dad and he's very worried about her and she says, "I'm afraid I'm going to die." And he like panics, obviously, as anybody would if your kid is saying that to you. And he tries to comfort her and she's like, "There's nothing that anybody can do about it." And he's like, "Listen, like tell me where you are. I'll get there right away. Like I just need to know." And she says to him, "If I go missing and you can't find me, I didn't leave you. I would never do that." And they both start crying at this point. This is a very sad moment because obviously like Stella's mom abandoned them, so she doesn't want to do the same thing to her father and think that it was his fault. And at this point he tries to tell her like it's not your fault that she left, because Stella obviously feels that way. And she even says, "Everyone said it was because of me." And he's like, "No, it's not your fault. It was about her. Like she felt trapped or something. I wish I had the answers. I don't. I'm sorry, but like it's not your fault." And Stella just says, "I love you. I'm sorry." And she ends up hanging up on him. And it turns out she's in a police station. So that's where she's calling him from. So the cop that we've been seeing throughout this whole movie tries to ask like, "We need answers. Like what's going on?" And nobody answers him. But Ramon is like, "What about my phone call?" And the cop looks at him and is like, "Rules don't apply to draft dodgers." And Ramon looks kind of shocked at this. And he's like, "Yeah, I know you lied about your last name." So he had like given the cop a different last name than what is actually his last name. And he's like, "Listen, you're going to do your duty to this country one way or another. And I'll help you if you tell me about your missing friends." And he pulls out the book because he has it now. And he obviously doesn't believe Stella and Ramon about the stories. And he's like, "We can't find any bodies." And Stella's like, "It's hard to believe, but we saved Ruth at the school." And the cop is like, "You didn't save anyone. Like she is in the nut house for the rest of her life." So obviously that incident drove her insane and she's fucking like locked up somewhere. And he tells Stella like, "You're free to go," but she refuses to leave because she doesn't want to leave Ramon. So he's like, "Well, okay." So he ends up locking them both up in cells right next to each other. And at this point, Ramon feels like he needs to explain himself about the whole draft dodging thing. And he's like, "Listen, I should have told you, like, you must think I'm a coward, but 2 months ago, they shipped my brother back from Vietnam in pieces. So when I got my draft notice, I just couldn't go. Like, they literally send you there to die. And if the book reads me, I'm afraid what it's going to say." And Stella at this point feels bad and she just like holds his hand through the cell. And we see that outside it's dark and stormy. Of course it is. Why the fuck wouldn't it be? So it's dark and stormy. And the cop looks at the open book, which is sitting on his desk. And sure enough, he starts to see a story being written. And this one is called Me Tai Do Ti Walker. And this is one of the stories from the first book. And as he's watching this, the lights start to flicker. And the cop ends up coming over to Ramon and Stella. And he's like, listen, who came up with this? And they're like, we didn't write the stories. Like, we're not writing the stories. And suddenly the lights go out completely. And the cop starts to hear his dog growling. And he turns and he sees that the dog is growling like at the fireplace, which, like, I don't know what police station has a fireplace, but this one fucking does. But Stella is like, listen, if there is another story, we are in danger. Like, please let us out. What's the story? Like, what's going on? And the cop just completely ignores her at this point, and he watches the dog watch the fireplace and growl at it, and he starts to hear this rustling coming from it. And Ramon understands. He's like, it's my turn. And Stella is like, what's the name in the book? Like, she's screaming, they're screaming, it's chaos. And the cop finally says Ramon. Like, it's Ramon's name in the book, so he's right. And Ramon is like, I knew it. Like, it's a fucking campfire story that used to scare me to death. The Jangly Man is coming. The who? What do you mean? And thunder crashes in the distance just to make this even fucking creepier. And sure enough, suddenly a head rolls out of the fireplace and it has its eyes closed, but then suddenly its eyes open and it says, "Me Tai Do Ti Walker." And the cop looks at it and just says, "Are you shitting me?" And he pulls out his gun and he starts shooting at this thing until he's out of bullets. And of course it does absolutely nothing. And then other body parts start to fall through the fireplace and start like cracking and moving and putting itself back together. And the cop just watches in terror as this thing is now a full, contorted, jangly ass body. And it goes up to the sheriff or the fucking cop and it just snaps his fucking neck and he dies. So the Jangly Man then continues to walk towards the cells, and we like slowly hear these footsteps approaching, and suddenly the cop's body is thrown towards the cell as the Jangly Man is all contorted, and he walks in calling Ramon's name, and he goes up to Ramon's cell. And now the Jangly Man in this is played by Troy James, who is like this crazy contortionist. You guys might remember, I think he was on, what show was it? America's Got Talent. He scared the shit out of everybody. Like, this man can do with his body what I've never seen anybody else be able to do. Like, he is perfect for horror movies, and he's been in a lot of horror movies. Like, if you look this guy up, you'll be like, oh, okay, like just off the fucking dome. Like, he's the Crooked Man in The Conjuring 2. He's in Anything for Jackson. I love watching a horror movie and seeing somebody contort because I'm immediately like, Troy James, I know it, and I look it up and it's always him. Like, if you've ever seen anybody contort in a horror movie, it's this fucking guy. So basically, like, they did the makeup on him because I'll put up a picture of the Jangly Man. Like, he doesn't look human, but all the body contortions that he does in this are real. It's all practical. Like, it's insane. So as the Jangly Man is going to Ramon's cell, Stella reaches through her cell and grabs the keys from the cop's body, and she's struggling as the Jangly Man starts to literally like squish himself through the cell bars to get to Ramon. But eventually Stella gets the keys and she unlocks both of the cells just in the nick of time as he's about to squeeze his way through, and they grab the book and they run out. So they run out into the storm because it's raining, and they get to a cop car, and Ramon looks at Stella and he's like, listen, that thing is only coming after me. Go to the house and tell her the truth. Like, that thing will follow me. I'll take it away from you. Stop her and you'll stop this. So Stella is kind of hesitant at first, but she agrees. So she runs to the house as Ramon gets in the car, and the Jangly Man crawls out of the station and starts running on all fours. There is something so feral about this thing obviously isn't human, but like, it's closer to a human than an animal. But the second something that is supposed to be human starts running on all fours, I'm fucking out, brother. Like, I'm out. That shit freaks me out. That's so unnatural. So Ramon's driving away, and suddenly this thing manages to jump on the hood of the car and starts like smashing the windows all around as Ramon tries to drive, and slams on his brakes so it kind of like falls to the front of the car, but it's now holding on the front. But he keeps driving, but he instead drives full speed at a fucking truck and crashes the car. So the Jangly Man is now pinned between this car and this truck, and Ramon gets out and he starts fucking running. And eventually we see the Jangly Man like struggle, but then suddenly all of his limbs fall apart. And we don't see this on camera, but we can like hear him putting himself back together, and suddenly he jumps up in front of the camera and now he starts fucking running. So there's a foot chase. So Stella eventually gets into the house and she calls out for Sarah, and she's like, Sarah, stop telling stories. Like, we know you're innocent, we want to help, but please stop telling these stories. And the house is completely silent, and Stella looks around and suddenly she hears the music box start playing, and she looks down at her hands and the book that she was just holding is gone. And when she looks back up, the house is once again back in this beautiful condition. So like it's perfectly together like it was in the late 1800s. And we cut back to Ramon, and he runs into the house and he finds the book on the floor, and he opens it, and there's a new story being written called The Haunted House. And that's a story in the books as well. And this time Stella's name is in it. So outside we see that the Jangly Man is still coming. Like, he's chasing Ramon. And Ramon runs upstairs, and he runs like past Stella, but it's like they're living in two different dimensions right now, because Stella can hear the footsteps going up the stairs, but she can't see Ramon, and Ramon can't see that he just walked past her. Like, they're living in two different planes of existence right now. So Stella, in the existence that she's in, starts to hear a man yelling at someone to find Sarah. She's out of her room again. And as this is happening outside, we once again see the Jangly Man, and he's chasing Ramon, and he now gets to the house and he chases Ramon upstairs, and they're running through the fucking halls. And eventually we cut back to Stella's experience, and we see that there's two men that are looking for Sarah. One of these men is Harold. So I think he was the initial Harold, and then Harold turned Tommy into the next Harold, or the next Scarecrow. So Stella hears these guys coming, and she dodges them, and she runs upstairs, and she locks herself in a room, and it's actually the same room that Ramon has now locked himself in. So we get this cool parallel of them like both at the door, but like one's brand new, one's like old and dilapidated. But we then hear a woman, an old woman, and she says, I hear her, she's in here. And we turn and we see that it's that old woman that Chuck had seen earlier, and she takes her veil off and she reveals that she's blind, so she can't see, but she can hear that Sarah is in the room, because sure enough, Stella turns around and looks in the mirror and she's Sarah. So it's like she's seeing this from Sarah's perspective. She's now become Sarah, and she starts running. And at the same time, Ramon locks the Jangly Man out as he's banging on the door trying to get in. And Stella continues running, and she sees little Lulu. She sees this little girl who points at the table. She's like basically telling her like hide underneath the table. So she goes to do that, and back with Ramon, the Jangly Man breaks down the fucking door. So Ramon at this point now runs downstairs, but he falls, he hurts his leg, and Lulu, back with Stella, lies to the guys. Like, the guys come down and are like, have you seen her? And she lies and says no, and they like drag her away because they know that she's lying. And back at the house, or like in Ramon's version of the actual house, we see that he looks at the ground and he finds glasses that look like Stella's. So he's like, what the fuck? And we cut back to Stella, and we see her hiding underneath this table, when suddenly this man just like grabs her and drags her out from underneath the table. And they're calling her Sarah. They're like, okay, Sarah, we got you. And as they're dragging her out, her glasses fall out and somebody steps on them. So like, that's what Ramon just found, her glasses on the floor. So as she's being dragged away, she's screaming, and Ramon can like hear this voice echoing, like the screams echoing, crying for help. And the men are telling Stella, like, you've been telling everybody about the water, and they drag her to the basement as Stella is just crying and screaming, I'm not Sarah, let me go. And she's screaming, and Harold says, like, try this again and we'll send you to the asylum. Like, you should have stayed in your room. You don't deserve the light. And they throw her in the room and turn the lights off. So like, now we understand why she ended up in the asylum. It was because she tried to escape, and she was trying to tell everybody how her family was poisoning the fucking water and this is what was killing the kids, but they framed her instead. So they lock Stella in the basement, and she cries, and now it's all back to old. Like the basement I think was always old and fucking falling apart. But Stella ends up hearing tapping, and she looks, and we get like a POV of her looking, because she doesn't have her glasses on, so it's all blurry. God, I remember that life. That fucking sucked. LASIK is the best thing I've ever done. But Stella looks up and she can see Sarah's silhouette sitting in the chair. And like, again, she can't see completely, but she knows that it's there. And she backs up into a shelf and this book falls and she looks up again and Sarah's gone. But the music box starts to play and Stella hears Sarah whisper her name. And she turns and she sees Sarah's ghost stand up and start walking towards her. And Sarah says to her, "I have another story just for you." And now we cut back to Ramon and we see that he is calling out for Stella and he's like, "Listen, if you can hear me, tell her the truth." And Stella can hear him. Like, she can hear his voice echoing. And she looks at Sarah and she's like, "No, it's time that you hear a story, Sarah." And she looks at her ghost and she's like, "Listen, you were a victim and now you've turned into a monster, the one that you said that they said that you were. Like, you've turned into exactly that and you took my friends." And then we cut back to Ramon and he's like crawling through the hallway because, again, his legs all fucked up, and he's calling out for Stella and he looks up at the ceiling and the fucking Jangly Man is on the ceiling and he jumps down on top of him. So now there's a fight between the two of them. And Stella can hear Ramon yelling and she looks at Sarah and is like, "Are you going to take him too?" And she goes on and she's like, "What your family did is on them, but what you do is on you, Sarah." And she stares at her. And Sarah's like very ghost-like. I'll put up a picture of her, but she's got like her white eyes, very pale skin because she was supposed to have albinism anyway, long blonde hair. So she stares at Sarah and Stella is like, "I'll tell your story, the real story, but the rage has to stop." And Sarah pulls out a pen and she hands it to Stella and Stella takes it and she tells Stella to use your blood. So Stella's like, "Okay." So she pricks her finger with this quill pen that she was just handed and she opens that book that fell and she opens to a blank page and she starts writing. And she writes, "Sarah Bellows was innocent. She knew the truth and tried to stop them. She was brave. She was harmed and she was destroyed by her own family and their greed and their lies and their sins." And she looks up again and tells Sarah, "I'll tell your story. You can let it go. Like, you can rest," pretty much. And Sarah stares at her for a minute and then suddenly she like backs up and she screams. And we cut back to upstairs and the Jangly Man collapses and lets Ramon go. And the house shakes and Stella back downstairs like closes her eyes as Sarah screamed and she opens her eyes and Sarah's gone. So it worked. So we get a voiceover from Stella and it's the same voiceover from the beginning. And she's saying, "Stories hurt, stories heal. If we repeat them often enough, they become real." And back in the house, we see Stella come up to Ramon. They hug and he puts the glasses back on her, even though they're all like cracked and shit, but at least she can see a little bit better. And the voiceover continues on saying, "If there's anything I learned from Sarah, it's to never give up." So we cut to Stella sometime later and we see that she's typing and she explains through this voiceover, "I told Sarah's story as I promised. I wrote about a lonely girl who wrote stories in the dark and how her family turned her into a monster. And some believed the story, but most didn't because, like Sarah, I was a lonely girl who could tell a good, creepy story." So we see Stella going to say bye to Ramon, who was about to get on a bus, and she gives him a letter and she promises that she's going to write him every day, and they go their separate ways. And he gets on a bus and it turns out he is doing what he needs to do. He's going to Vietnam, so he stopped running. And as he's driving away on the bus, he's reading this letter from Stella, and we're getting a voiceover of her saying, "Stories give us a home to go back to." So the final shot of this movie we get is Stella in a car and she's driving. She's not driving. Her dad is driving. She's in the passenger seat. And we're getting a voiceover from Stella saying, "Chuck and Auggie are still gone, but I know there's a way to bring them back. And the secret is in the book. And we won't stop until we find them." And we pan to the back seat and we see that Ruth is sitting back there as well. So she's made it. She's gotten herself together and they are out searching to find Chuck and Auggie. And this dramatic music plays as we see the car driving down the road and we cut to black and the movie ends. And now for a long time, I heard that there was going to be a sequel to this movie, which like 9 out of 10 times, I don't think a movie needs a sequel. This one, I would take a sequel because I would love to find Chuck and Auggie. Like, I would love to see them go on that exploration fucking journey, whatever you want to call it, to find the two of them. Like, I think that would be a lot of fun. So I personally would love to see a sequel. I think it's still up in the air. I wouldn't doubt if we got one eventually. So according to Google, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark Part 2 was in development but currently stalled, with the story and script in progress, but delays caused by COVID, of course, fucking ruined everything, and the Hollywood strikes. So the same director was expected to return. His name is Andre Overdahl. I'm probably saying that completely wrong. And also Guillermo del Toro produced this movie, which, like, any movie with creature and character designs like this, like, you can feel his influence. Like, even though they were heavily taken from the book, of course, like, I feel like they were done so well, and that can only be done by him. So he produced this movie, and he's also was, at least at some point, set to produce the second movie, and the same writers were going to come back as well. Yeah, so a sequel was officially announced in April 2020, but then was delayed because of COVID, and then there were the strikes in 2023, so they were delayed even more. And apparently there is a completed draft of the script, the story has been developed, and Paramount is funding the movie. So I don't know why it hasn't happened yet, or like what's going on with it, but honestly, I do hope to see it. Like, I really hope that it comes to fruition eventually, because I would definitely watch it. I would like to watch it. But that's Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Again, if you read these books as a kid like I did, this movie was very nostalgic to me, and like it was really cool to see these stories come to life, and especially like in the way that they did. Like, I really like how they, again, like adapted them, not completely, but used them as a basis, and how they just brought them all together. Like how they made this whole story come together and used the stories just as pieces of it. I think it's really cool. I think it's a lot of fun. Again, I think it's a really good movie to get your kids into the horror genre if you're looking to do that. So if you are, check it out this Halloween, man. I think it's super fucking cool. But that was Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. On Wednesday, we're going to be talking about Ghost Watch, and then next Friday's episode is going to be on Cry Wolf. So we got a good week coming up. We got a great lineup this month, if I do say so myself. I love all of these movies that we'll be talking about, so I'm very excited for it. I hope you guys liked today's episode. If you haven't yet given me a 5-star rating on Spotify, Apple, wherever you're listening to me, it would be super helpful, helps push me out into the algorithm and find other people to join our lovely little community that we have growing here. So until next episode, you guys know where to find me. It's horror_chronicles on TikTok and Instagram. I post every day, so you can keep up with me there. And until next time, watch more horror movies and stay spooky, my friends.